Over recent years, the relationship between China and the African continent has become one of the most debated topics in international development circles. Critics in Western capitals frequently accuse Beijing of practicing what they call debt trap diplomacy, a strategy they claim is designed to ensnare developing nations in unsustainable financial obligations. Meanwhile, supporters argue that Chinese engagement has delivered something African nations desperately need: tangible infrastructure that Western aid promises rarely materialized into concrete results. The numbers tell a compelling story. Since the year 2000, Chinese entities have poured over $700 billion into African economies. This staggering investment has funded the construction of highways connecting remote regions to urban centers, bridges spanning major rivers, hospitals equipped with modern medical technology, and schools that educate millions of children across the continent. These projects have fundamentally reshaped the physical and economic landscape of numerous African countries. Yet amid these massive infrastructure initiatives, the railways, the ports, the power plants, there exists a quieter project that reveals something different about China's approach to African development. In the West African nation of Ghana, Chinese engineers and workers built something far simpler, yet profoundly impactful. More than 1,000 water wells, completely free of charge, scattered across remote villages where clean water had been a luxury rather than a basic right. This isn't a mega project that makes international headlines. There are no grand ribbon-cutting ceremonies with world leaders, no gleaming towers or impressive statistics about cargo capacity. Instead, these wells now serve approximately 500,000 Ghanaians, transforming daily life in communities that had struggled for generations to access clean drinking water. The local response has been overwhelmingly positive. Ghanaian villagers express deep appreciation for what China has accomplished in their communities. But this generosity raises an important question that demands examination. Why would China invest resources to build free water infrastructure in rural Ghana? What strategic calculations lie beneath this humanitarian gesture? And what did Beijing ultimately gain from digging wells in some of the poorest villages on Earth? Today, we're going to explore the complete story behind this initiative, the historical context, the challenging implementation, and the economic agreement that followed. If you find this analysis valuable, please subscribe to stay informed about global economic and geopolitical developments. Now, let's examine what really happened in Ghana. Critics in Western capitals frequently accuse Beijing of practicing what they call debt trap diplomacy, a strategy they claim is designed to ensnare developing nations in unsustainable financial obligations. Meanwhile, supporters argue that Chinese engagement has delivered something African nations desperately need: tangible infrastructure that Western aid promises rarely materialized into concrete results. The numbers tell a compelling story. Since the year 2000, Chinese entities have poured over $700 billion into African economies. This staggering investment has funded the construction of highways connecting remote regions to urban centers, bridges spanning major rivers, hospitals equipped with modern medical technology, and schools that educate millions of children across the continent. These projects have fundamentally reshaped the physical and economic landscape of numerous African countries. Yet amid these massive infrastructure initiatives, the railways, the ports, the power plants, there exists a quieter project that reveals something different about China's approach to African development. In the West African nation of Ghana, Chinese engineers and workers built something far simpler, yet profoundly impactful: more than 1,000 water wells, completely free of charge, scattered across remote villages where clean water had been a luxury rather than a basic right. This isn't a mega project that makes international headlines. There are no grand ribbon-cutting ceremonies with world leaders, no gleaming towers or impressive statistics about cargo capacity. Instead, these wells now serve approximately 500,000 Ghanaians, transforming daily life in communities that had struggled for generations to access clean drinking water. The local response has been overwhelmingly positive. Ghanaian villagers express deep appreciation for what China has accomplished in their communities. But this generosity raises an important question that demands examination. Why would China invest resources to build free water infrastructure in rural Ghana? What strategic calculations lie beneath this humanitarian gesture? And what did Beijing ultimately gain from digging wells in some of the poorest villages on Earth? Today, we're going to explore the complete story behind this initiative, the historical context, the challenging implementation, and the economic agreement that followed. If you find this analysis valuable, please subscribe to stay informed about global economic and geopolitical developments. Ghana, a nation rich in resources, burdened by history. Ghana sits on the western coast of Africa, a nation that covers approximately 230,000 square kilometers. Despite being classified among the world's economically disadvantaged countries, Ghana supports a population exceeding 32 million people. This translates to a population density of over 130 individuals per square kilometer, a remarkably high concentration for this region of West Africa. The Ghanaian economy relies heavily on extractive industries. Mining operations contribute roughly 15% directly to the nation's gross domestic product, making mineral extraction a cornerstone of economic activity. Beneath Ghanaian soil lies an impressive array of valuable resources: gold deposits that have been mined for centuries, diamonds that sparkle in riverbeds, bauxite that feeds aluminum production, manganese ore essential for steel manufacturing, and offshore oil reserves that promise energy independence. Gold mining in particular has defined Ghana's economic identity. Historical records show that European traders called this region the Gold Coast, a name that reflected the precious metals abundance and the colonial appetites it attracted. Today, Ghana ranks as Africa's second-largest gold producer, trailing only South Africa in output volume. The geological surveys are staggering. Experts estimate that Ghana contains approximately 2 billion ounces of gold within its borders, with nearly 200 million ounces already confirmed through detailed exploration. To put this in perspective, this represents wealth measured in the hundreds of billions of dollars at current market prices. Diamonds add another layer to Ghana's mineral wealth. The country possesses an estimated 100 million carats of diamond reserves, with the richest deposits concentrated in two primary areas: the Bilim Valley stretching across the eastern regions, and the Bangsa Valley dominating the western territories. This abundance places Ghana fourth globally in diamond production capacity. Bauxite represents yet another strategic resource. Ghana holds approximately 900 million tons of this aluminum ore, concentrated primarily around the Awaso and Nkoko districts. In an era where aluminum demand continues rising for everything from beverage cans to aircraft construction, this represents significant potential wealth. But this mineral abundance became Ghana's curse long before it could become its blessing. The colonial wound: how Europe extracted wealth and left poverty. Ghana's resource wealth attracted European colonial powers like blood draws sharks. Beginning in the 15th century, Portuguese, Dutch, British, and other European traders established fortified positions along the coast. What began as trading posts evolved into instruments of exploitation, extraction, and eventually total colonial domination. The British ultimately established comprehensive control, transforming the Gold Coast into a colonial possession designed to extract maximum wealth at minimum cost. For the Ghanaian people, this meant systematic dispossession. They became laborers on land their ancestors had inhabited for millennia, working under brutal conditions to extract resources that enriched distant European treasuries. The human cost was immeasurable. Beyond the millions who suffered under the transatlantic slave trade that departed from Ghanaian ports, those who remained faced grinding exploitation in mines and on plantations. The colonial economy was designed with surgical precision to benefit European shareholders, with minimal consideration for the welfare of the indigenous population. Ghana finally achieved independence in March 1957, becoming the first sub-Saharan African nation to break free from colonial rule. Kwame Nkrumah, the independence leader, declared that Ghana's freedom was meaningless unless it was linked to the total liberation of Africa. The moment represented hope, determination, and the promise of self-directed development. But independence revealed the depth of the damage. Decades of colonial extraction had depleted many of the most accessible mineral deposits. The infrastructure that existed served only to move resources from mines to ports, not to develop a functional domestic economy. Educational systems had been designed to produce clerks and low-level administrators, not engineers or entrepreneurs. The economic structures were fundamentally colonial, and transforming them would prove extraordinarily difficult. The statistics reveal the extent of the challenge. Currently, approximately 850,000 Ghanaians live below the poverty line, with 28% experiencing extreme poverty, surviving on an average of just $1.25 per day. This level of deprivation, in a nation so rich in natural resources, stands as a testament to how thoroughly colonialism distorted Ghana's development trajectory. In 1983, Ghana faced a catastrophe that exposed just how vulnerable its people remained. A devastating drought descended upon the nation, destroying virtually all crops and pastures across vast regions. The agricultural sector, which employed the majority of Ghanaians, essentially collapsed within a single growing season. Farmland that had sustained communities for generations turned to dust. Crops withered before they could produce anything resembling a harvest. Livestock died in massive numbers as both water and fodder disappeared. The food crisis that followed brought genuine famine conditions to many regions. But the drought revealed an even more fundamental crisis: the absence of reliable water infrastructure in rural areas. While urban centers had some access to piped water systems, countless villages depended entirely on natural water sources: ponds, seasonal streams, and shallow wells that quickly dried up when the rains failed. Even in normal years, accessing water in rural Ghana required enormous effort. In remote communities, the daily water collection routine became a grueling test of endurance that consumed hours and exhausted multiple family members. A typical scenario unfolded like this. Each morning, 5 family members would prepare for the water journey. They would gather containers, typically large basins or buckets, and begin the trek to the nearest pond, which might be several kilometers from the village. The path often required walking through grass that reached shoulder height, creating both physical obstacles and potential encounters with snakes or other wildlife. Upon reaching the pond, they would fill their containers and begin the return journey, balancing the heavy water vessels on their heads in the traditional manner. A single trip might yield enough water for cooking and basic hygiene, but certainly not enough for a family's full daily needs. This meant making the journey at least 3 times, consuming most of the day and leaving little energy for other productive activities. The physical toll was severe, particularly for women and children who typically bore this responsibility. Chronic back and neck problems became common. The time spent on water collection meant less time for education, economic activities, or rest. But the exhaustion was only part of the problem. The water source itself posed serious health risks that the villagers understood but could not avoid. The ponds served as drinking sources not just for humans, but for livestock and wildlife. Animals would wade into the water to drink, inevitably defecating in the same water that villagers would later collect for their households. Rainfall would wash agricultural runoff, animal waste, and other contaminants into these ponds, creating a toxic mixture of bacteria, parasites, and pollutants. The water often appeared visibly cloudy or discolored, but with no alternative source available, families had no choice but to use it. The health consequences were predictable and devastating. Waterborne diseases including cholera, typhoid, dysentery, and various parasitic infections spread regularly through communities. Children were particularly vulnerable, with diarrheal diseases becoming a leading cause of child mortality. Families would watch helplessly as illnesses that could be prevented by clean water claimed young lives. The Ghanaian government recognized this crisis and attempted to address it through well drilling programs, but the challenges proved immense. Ghana's geological conditions meant that groundwater typically lay at significant depths, often 60 meters or more below the surface. Reaching these aquifers required specialized drilling equipment, technical expertise, and accurate geological surveys to locate the most promising sites. Ghana's government lacked the advanced exploration technology needed to map underground water sources effectively. Drilling in the wrong location meant wasting limited resources on a dry well. Even when water was found, many communities lacked the funds to purchase and install hand pumps or maintain the wells over time. Progress was painfully slow. Wells were built, but not nearly fast enough to meet the needs of millions of rural Ghanaians. As of 2015, the situation in many villages remained essentially unchanged from decades earlier, a daily struggle for survival's most basic necessity. Then, something shifted in the geopolitical landscape that would ultimately reach rural Ghanaian villages. The Belt and Road Initiative, China's global infrastructure vision. In September 2013, Chinese President Xi Jinping delivered a speech at Nazarbayev University in Kazakhstan that would reshape global economic cooperation. He outlined an ambitious vision called the Belt and Road Initiative, a modern reimagining of the ancient Silk Road trade routes that once connected China to Europe and Africa. The initiative comprised two interconnected components. The first, the Silk Road Economic Belt, would create overland corridors linking China through Central Asia to Europe. The second, the 21st Century Maritime Silk Road, would establish sea routes connecting China's coast through Southeast Asia, South Asia, Africa, and onward to Europe. The stated goal was straightforward: expand economic cooperation through infrastructure development, investment, and trade facilitation with partner nations across Asia, Africa, and Europe. China would leverage its massive foreign exchange reserves, manufacturing capacity, and engineering expertise to build the roads, railways, ports, and power systems that developing nations needed but couldn't afford to build themselves. For Africa, this represented a potentially transformative opportunity. The continent had long struggled with an infrastructure deficit that constrained economic development. The African Development Bank estimated that Africa needed approximately $100 billion annually in infrastructure investment, but received less than half that amount from all sources combined. Western development assistance, while valuable, had proven insufficient and often came attached to conditions that African nations found constraining. International financial institutions frequently demanded policy changes, privatization requirements, or governance reforms as preconditions for loans. The infrastructure that did get built often served extractive industries rather than broader development needs. China's approach differed in important ways. Beijing emphasized what it called South-South cooperation, partnerships between developing nations based on mutual benefit and non-interference in domestic affairs. Chinese officials repeatedly stressed that they would not impose political conditions or governance requirements on partner nations. Africa became one of the first regions to formally engage with the Belt and Road Initiative, with numerous nations signing cooperation agreements throughout 2014 and 2015. The projects that followed ranged from the massive, like the standard gauge railway in Kenya, to the modest but impactful. In Ghana, the initiative would manifest in an unexpected form. 1,000 water wells spread across rural communities that had never appeared on any strategic infrastructure map. November 2015. China's commitment to Ghana's water crisis. In November 2015, the Chinese government announced a decision that surprised many observers. Rather than focusing exclusively on high-visibility infrastructure like the ports and highways being built elsewhere in Africa, China would address one of Ghana's most basic but persistent challenges: Rural water access. The commitment was specific and substantial. China would provide funding, equipment, and expertise to construct 1,000 water wells across 832 villages spanning 6 Ghanaian provinces. Critically, this would be provided as grant assistance, no loans to repay, no debt burden, completely free. The scale and nature of this commitment stood out. These wells wouldn't generate revenue. They wouldn't facilitate Chinese exports or create obvious commercial advantages. They would simply provide clean water to some of Ghana's poorest and most remote communities. The Ghanaian government recognized the significance immediately. This project directly addressed a development challenge that had persisted since independence, one that affected hundreds of thousands of citizens but had proven difficult to solve with limited national resources. In December 2015, Chinese engineering teams began arriving in Ghana to commence the work. What followed would be a 2-year effort that tested the technical capabilities and determination of everyone involved. Engineering challenges, building wells in difficult terrain. The Chinese construction teams quickly discovered that drilling wells in rural Ghana presented formidable obstacles that went far beyond simply operating drilling equipment. Ghana's topography varies dramatically across relatively short distances. Teams encountered everything from dense tropical forests to semi-arid grasslands, from flat plains to hilly terrain that made transporting heavy equipment extraordinarily difficult. Each location required different approaches and adaptations. The climate imposed its own challenges, particularly the pronounced rainy season that transforms much of Ghana between May and October. During these months, heavy rains turn unpaved roads into rivers of mud that make transportation nearly impossible. Construction sites become waterlogged, and the flooding can damage equipment and undermine partially completed wells. Logistics became a constant battle. The 832 target villages were scattered across 6 provinces, many connected only by rough tracks rather than proper roads. Heavy drilling rigs, generators, pumps, and construction materials had to be transported to each site, sometimes requiring multiple days of slow, careful movement to avoid equipment damage. The drilling itself revealed Ghana's geological complexity. In some locations, groundwater sat at relatively accessible depths of 40 to 50 meters. But in other areas, the teams drilled past 60 meters, then 70, then 80, searching for aquifers capable of providing reliable water supplies. The geological formations varied dramatically. Some sites featured relatively soft sedimentary layers that drilling equipment could penetrate efficiently. Others presented hard rock formations that slowed progress to a crawl and wore down drill bits rapidly, requiring frequent replacements. In several locations, the teams encountered what geologists call false aquifers, underground formations that initially appeared to contain water, but proved insufficient for a productive well. These false starts meant abandoning partially completed wells and drilling again at nearby sites, consuming additional time and resources. Water quality testing added another layer of complexity. Simply reaching water wasn't sufficient. The water had to meet safety standards for human consumption. Some aquifers contained excessive mineral concentrations or other contaminants that made them unsuitable for drinking. Engineers had to test multiple sites in some villages before finding water sources that passed quality standards. The Chinese workers responded to these challenges with remarkable persistence. Work crews operated on extended schedules, often laboring from dawn until well after dark to maintain progress. When the rainy season threatened to halt work entirely, teams adapted by focusing on sites with better drainage or by implementing temporary solutions to manage flooding. Technical expertise proved crucial. Chinese engineers brought sophisticated drilling equipment far more advanced than what had been previously available in rural Ghana. They also introduced modern geological survey techniques that improved the success rate of finding productive aquifers. Beyond the technical aspects, the teams made efforts to engage with local communities. Engineers would consult with village leaders about the optimal well locations, placing them where they would provide maximum benefit to the most residents. They trained local personnel on basic maintenance procedures, helping ensure the wells could be sustained after the Chinese teams departed. The hand pumps installed at each well represented another thoughtful detail. These manually operated pumps required no electricity and minimal maintenance, making them ideal for remote villages without reliable power supplies. The design was robust enough to withstand heavy daily use by hundreds of people. After 24 months of sustained effort, working through equipment breakdowns, seasonal flooding, geological disappointments, and logistical nightmares, the Chinese teams achieved something remarkable. They didn't just meet the target of 1,000 wells, they exceeded it, completing 1,029 functioning water wells by the end of 2017. Impact: 500,000 lives transformed. The completion of these wells fundamentally altered daily existence for approximately 500,000 Ghanaians living in the target communities. The most immediate impact was the dramatic reduction in time and physical labor required for water collection. Families that had previously spent hours each day walking to distant ponds now found clean water within a few minutes' walk from their homes. This liberated time and energy that could be redirected toward education, agricultural work, small business activities, or simply rest and family life. For women and girls, who traditionally bore primary responsibility for water collection, the change was especially significant. Young girls who had missed school to help gather water could now attend classes regularly. Women could engage in income-generating activities rather than spending half their day carrying water vessels. The health benefits proved equally transformative. Communities reported dramatic decreases in waterborne diseases within months of the wells becoming operational. Cholera outbreaks, which had previously occurred with tragic regularity, became rare. Diarrheal diseases among children dropped substantially, directly reducing child mortality rates. Families could now use water more freely for hygiene purposes, washing hands, bathing, cleaning food preparation areas, practices that had been limited when every liter of water represented hours of effort to obtain. This additional hygiene contributed to broader health improvements beyond just waterborne diseases. Agricultural productivity benefited as well. With easier access to water, families could maintain small vegetable gardens, increasing food security and nutritional diversity. Livestock health improved when animals received regular access to clean water rather than sharing contaminated ponds with humans. The psychological and social impacts shouldn't be underestimated. The constant stress of water scarcity, wondering whether enough water could be collected each day, worrying about children becoming sick from contaminated sources, lifted from these communities. The wells became gathering places where neighbors would meet and socialize, strengthening community bonds. Ghanaian officials and community leaders expressed profound gratitude for what had been accomplished. The wells stood as tangible evidence of international cooperation that directly improved ordinary people's lives rather than serving abstract geopolitical purposes. But as with any major international initiative, questions naturally arose about motivations and consequences. China's investment of resources, expertise, and effort into these wells represented a significant commitment. What did Beijing expect in return?